in relationship with grandmother's voice. So I'd like to remind everyone that we are recording today's discussion because we do post these after the session. If you'd like to listen to it again or share it with friends. So please know that we are recording this and the recording has started. All right, so I'd like to welcome everyone. And so we will begin with a land acknowledgement. When I was about 4 years old, my father and I planted a tree, and the tree at that time when we planted it was the same height as me, and my father would refer to it as Tanya's tree. He explained to me that this tree would grow as I would grow, and that one day I would be an older woman, and that this tree would still be standing here in this spot, tall and strong. So over the years, I watched this tree grow, and it grew taller than me and big and strong. And I often return back to visit the tree, which is still standing and has a beautiful presence in the yard and in the neighborhood where it's located. But now when I visit this tree, I can add to its story because I know more about the land that we planted this tree on. And I hope that this tree continues to grow strong, knowing that one day it will even survive me. So Oakville, as we know it, is rich in the history and modern traditions of many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. From the lands of the Anishinaabe to the Adirondack and the Haudenosaunee, these lands surrounding the Great Lakes are steeped in First Nations history. The town of Oakville is located on treaties 14 and 22, lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, and we acknowledge and thank the Mississaugas, the treaty holders, for being stewards of this territory. So today I'd like to welcome back Jody, who's with us today, Jody Harbor from Grandmother's Voice, and the town is very excited to continue these discussions with Grandmother's Voice. Nabil Rahman from the town of Oakville, my colleague, is also here today, and we will be keeping track of the chat and helping anyone along. So before we get started, Jody's going to introduce our guest today. Nabil is going to talk a little bit about preparing for participation. But before we do that, I'd just like to remind everyone of the intersection at Thomas and Church Street, which features an orange crosswalk in honor and remembrance of the Indigenous children who never returned home to their families, as well as survivors, families, and communities affected by the residential school system across Canada. So this is a visual reminder in our community of the important truth and reconciliation work that needs and must continue in our community. The conversations we have here today and the weeks that follow encourages critical discussions about historical and contemporary issues facing Indigenous peoples. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Nabil for a few housekeeping instructions.
Thank you, Tanya, and thank you for that beautiful and reflective land acknowledgement. I thought we really benefited from that. And so in the nature of our discourse and conversation, these are some instructions to connect and participate and engage. So please use the chat box to communicate. You can look at the hand up feature in the chat box to ask any questions. You can privately message myself and Tanya to ask questions without interruptions of the presentation. And please, very important, unless otherwise instructed, let's keep ourselves on mute. Let's respect one another and each other's perspective. And as Tanya mentioned, this program is being recorded. And some participation agreements, because we're going to talk about things that might make us a little bit uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean that we don't need to be engaged, right? We need to stay engaged, morally, emotionally, intellectually, and socially involved in the conversation and dialogue that we're having. Sometimes we need to experience the discomfort. The discomfort is inevitable when we have to learn and grow and reflect, especially when it's about discussions of race, and participants make a commitment to bring issues into the open. We need to speak our truths. That's essentially what the Resurgence of the Indigenous Voice is to give a platform for that truth to be spoken and for us as allies to listen. This means we have to be open about our thoughts and feelings, not just what you think, what others want to hear, and accept and expect non-disclosure. This agreement asks participants to hang out in uncertainty and not rush to quick solutions, especially in relations to racial understanding, which requires an ongoing dialogue. And finally, based on the nature of some of the conversation that we might be having today and for the weeks to come, these are some crisis numbers that are available. You can always message Tanya or myself if at any point you're feeling uncomfortable or overwhelmed by the content. Please message us and we will walk you through these support numbers and if you have any questions in that space at all. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jody and to Faith for our wonderful discussion today.
Hi, Scano. It's so good to see everyone here again today. For those of you who are first time joining us, we appreciate you spending this time and taking time out of this beautiful day to be with us. Thank you, Tanya, for your beautiful land acknowledgement. It's, I love that our land acknowledgements are becoming deeper, more connected. And that's really what the purpose was and is for the land acknowledgement, not just educating us on the truths of the land that we live on, but also the connection to really awaken us. The elders have not recently, for many years, but what's happening right now, currently in this time is they're saying that, the people are awakening. And this is a really good time for us to be having conversations like this, because the eighth fire has been ignited. And these are all references to what's happening in our universe and in our world. And, so thank you. For those of you who know me, I'm Jody Harbour. I'm a co-founder of Grandmother's Voice. I've lived in the Halton region for 30 years. I've raised my children here. I've, had a wonderful life in this community. And, about 10 years ago, I really started to connect myself with my understanding of my responsibilities as an Indigenous woman, doing my genealogy, understanding my relationship with the land. And through this, I've learned the importance of being present and connected to the land. And, when we gather together like this as people, to have conversations, to be in relationship, to share with one another, it's important that we bring our minds and our hearts together. And so I do like to share from my ancestry, the Thanksgiving address. And in this little book you can find in many places. If you ever travel to any of the reserves or communities, they will have books like this handy. And I love that this is being shared now, because there was a time that this was not allowed to be shared. These words were not allowed to be shared. And there are many of our elders that have been protecting these languages and these words and these practices and these beliefs for many years. And so just acknowledging that, it would take me a very long time if I did acknowledge and speak of the Thanksgiving address. But the idea is that this has been for thousands of years, within the Haudenosaunee people, acknowledging and greetings to the natural world. And so when we come together, that's what we do, is we always greet the people first, because if it wasn't for us, we wouldn't have this gathering. And so thank you, Nyawa, to all of you who've made it here today and who will share these words or share this link or share this time with your friends, even, just to let them know that there's some really great people that are coming here to share their experiences, so that we can all move forward in relationship and in reconciliation to what most people are looking towards right now. And so just making, I hope to name everything in this. I know in my heart, I think of it, I'm looking out my window out front, and I'm grateful that I have elders that remind me to stay connected to Mother Earth and know that I belong to her, and that if it was not, if we didn't have her, we wouldn't be here. And so I'm grateful every day I wake up with that understanding of how important she is to us, and acknowledging everything that she, that's provided here from the Creator, our waters that, we saw today, or if you were lucky enough to wake up to see the beautiful blanket of snow, you know that it's time for her to rest and for us to even begin to start resting. Like the animals, we're no longer seeing them, or maybe you are, they're scurrying around trying to get the last little bit of their, what they're saving, going to save for their winters. But, that's the, this is what we're seeing, the change in time. And that snow is meant to protect her. It's meant to protect her while she rests over the winter. And so I acknowledge the snow that's come, that is also our waters that, that keep us healthy. And so the fish that are in those waters that, clean the waters and provide food for us, the plants that are now resting as well, and the plant foods and the herbs and the medicines that are a part of what adorns Mother Earth. And so acknowledging the animals that are preparing for their their winter rest, the trees that look so beautiful with the snow on them, this is just a way to wake up to the beauty around us, and that everything that was created or provided for us, if we could just look at how everything lives in harmony without us disturbing it. Because I think, Faith may have mentioned this last week, like that doesn't need us, the earth and all, it doesn't need us. And so we just need to, in this time of awakening, acknowledge that if we stop and we take time to look, we can actually, start to take on the harmony that Mother Nature and everything around us provides for us. And so the birds, I mean, if we were lucky enough to hear them this morning, we don't really hear them so much in the winter as we do in the summer or in the spring. And when they're waking us up in the morning with their beautiful songs, they too remind us of the joy in life, and that we have to continue to look for hope and pay attention to that and look for the peace around us, because that's how we learn how to live in a good way. And so acknowledging the thunders that will also be, probably resting or waiting for the spring, because when they come, we know the rain comes and that it's time to move things around again. The sun that shows up every day for us rises in the east and sets in the west, and it reminds us that every day is a new day, and that we shouldn't be holding anything that from the day before that weighs on us, because once that day is over, there's nothing that we can do about it. And so I acknowledge the grandmother moon. We just had a beautiful full moon, and it was probably one of the most energetic times I felt connected. And so many people spoke about the moon and the eclipse that was happening. And I really noticed that in my everyday life and conversation, where people that were never really spoke about the elements or spoke about the earth mentioned about what was happening with grandmother moon, because she does guide our waters and lights up our sky. And really it does affect our energy if we pay attention to the 3 days before and the 3 days after. The stars that represent all the people and all of our ancestors that moved on and hold a place in the sky for us, to remind us on those days where we're feeling heavy or that we're missing them, that they are there overlooking us and taking care of us from the sky with the beauty. It's like they're jewels up there reminding us. And then for one thing that I'm really grateful for is just being in a time right now where it's okay to acknowledge that you're connected to the enlightened, spirits and ancestors that guide us in this time and in our time, I mean, here on earth. And it's okay that now we can acknowledge that we can feel those energies around us of the loved ones, and their spirit does still live and exist. And those that came here and continue to come here to share. And so I just like to, I'm noticing that something is going on my screen. Oh no, it's not anyone else. Sorry.
Sorry, Jody, it's chat. I flipped over to the next one about a word
okay.
that you're great, how you're feeling, but it's okay. I'll flip over there.
Okay. And I'll just finish with just acknowledging the creator and that if, that's all I have to say about that is the creator. We're provided for. And if we can put ourselves in our minds in our hearts, in that place of trusting that we are provided for, we can every day begin our day with hope and peace and love, and know that when we come together in this space, I'm being guided in this moment to share with you what I know, and my experiences. And you take from this whatever resonates with you. And we sit here together with our open hearts and minds and know that we're in a time of great change. And I'm really grateful that every time I show up here, I have sisters and relatives that come to support what I'm learning along my journey to share with you. And so I'm excited. I love my guest with me today, my sister, Faith Hale. We met several years ago, and we're definitely meant to come together to do this work, because from the moment we met, we've just been riding this wave of love. I don't know what else to say, but it's just been a really strong bond that she's been able to guide me in a way that helps me share with my community and share with Indigenous community members. And I'm so grateful that she's here with us today. And so I'd like to have her introduce herself before we move forward. And then, yeah, go ahead, Faith. And then we can get back to that. How are we feeling? Or is it the other way around?
I'm trying to unmute and I keep hitting the slide. So I apologize for that. There it is. Again, thank you, Jody, for that acknowledgement, because it's so important. And I was trying to remember myself that there was a study done on water, and I can't remember who the actual study was done by, and I apologize for that, but it was a water study that was done, and it's widely known now across the world. But I know the snowflake is really the design when you have joy. So we're able, when we see that snowflake, and I mean, there isn't one snowflake that's the same year after year after year after year after year. Just like I don't believe there's one human being the same year after year after year after year. So there's so much joy in creation that it is time to wake up. And I love that, because part of the ceremony that took place when COVID was happening, we didn't even call it COVID then, it was maybe the coronavirus. When the grandmothers prayed about that, and the message that came back to us was that this was to wake us up. And I remember thinking, wake us up to what? Just in my own little world. And it's spiritually, that message keeps coming to wake us up, to be more in balance and in tune to what it is to have joy and celebration. So some time ago, a man that I highly respected, the late John Ogoni, Ogoni from Shagwenda, he talked about a time when we would have to learn the language of joy and celebration again, because our children born after 2000 pretty much would only come with the language of joy and celebration. So when I think about that today, joy and celebration comes from the work that we're going to share with you, and keeping that balance in our lives every day. So it's a work of the individuals. It's not a work that community organizations, people do. It really is the work of the individual to find your joy, to find your peace, and hold that, because it is so dear. It is so important. Even the water transforms to snowflakes to prove it. I mean, that's the message, right? You have snow where you're at today. So when we think about myself, Odanagabagish, that's my Indigenous name. I'm Mandanadadsa, Mandaree from North Dakota. I've been in this part of Turtle Island for almost 40 years. I am the executive director of Scunna Family Learning Center. And when we receive those names, I'm taught in my way is that it really is a purpose, a direction in life. Some of you may have names. You may not call it, actually we call it today spirit name, but honestly, I've heard it talked about as our earth name. So when you're born, your parents are considering and thinking about your little face, how many toes and fingers you'll have, how much hair you'll have, if you're going to be a girl or a boy, or, what all of that is. And they're considering your name. And a lot of people put, still today, a lot of meaning into their children's names, a lot of meaning. And I believe that's what it is, to give you purpose in life. And sometimes we don't like our names. Sometimes it's like, that's a pretty heavy name. When what I would call my social security number name, or my social insurance number name, or my tax name, Faith Hill, which I'm registered as. When I think about Faith, that's a heavy name for a little girl. And when I learned about that throughout my life, I was like, Mom, why'd you do that? That's such a heavy name. And when you think about it, the reference to faith is really, believing in the things we don't see. And I'm that person. So I think there was a lot of insight to, naming today and what that means. And I believe that still is across all cultures and beliefs and human beings, that when we name something, we give it meaning. And that meaning and purpose is what helps us in life. So Odanagabagis means blooming flowers in the spring, when they pop all at once, the little ones, how my grandmother explained it. And I see that in reference today in my life when I work with children and family, and I see them blossom and bloom all at once, because that's who we are in community. So being a grandmother of now 8, I think the last time we met, I was waiting for him, or maybe he was just born. I'm not sure, but he's over a week old. So we have 7 grandsons and a granddaughter. And her name happens to be Eden. And I understand that too. So when I think about, all of this time and coming together and sharing this knowledge, it comes from so many, that when we believe in it, we're able to share it with others and acknowledge that in our lives. So what we did ask was that in an opening, that you would put something into the chat, just a word of how you're feeling and thinking. And Joe, that's what you saw popping up, because I put it back really quick, but there's some people in here that are really tuned in. I sure hope you have lunch in front of you. And I sure hope you have some sustenance and water, because it is past the noon hour. And I know myself, I get a little hangry. We'll talk about that when I don't eat and I'm hungry. So when I think about my emotion and how sustenance does that. So feel free to go ahead and, add your chat to the word and ground yourself into this particular segment of our work. What I will do, Jody, is I'm just going to briefly review this and get to the part of the slide where we're beginning today, because I feel like there might be some new people that may not have understood. So I'm going to do this real quick, and then I'm going to land where we're supposed to begin actually today. So we did talk about one dish, one spoon. These slides will be made available to you, I believe, through Grandmother's Voice, Jody. So you can take notes if you want. Sometimes I take pictures. That's allowed too, because, it's just with me, right? It's what I need. We live this. And again, it can be shared amongst as many people as you want. When you have the conversation, it's really about the goodness. So one dish, one spoon just simply means it's a treaty, and it's an agreement and a promise between Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and now all people. So all this was, back in the day, a long time ago, but it really talks about the one dish is the purple design in the middle of the beads. It represents our sharing and respect, which we're doing now. And the one spoon is the white little design in the middle that talks about mindfulness and peace. So when we do come together, it's really about sharing and respect for one another, because we know we all come from different directions, and that we need to do this with mindfulness and peace. And when we do that, it's a good way of life. That's what we do know. So this one dish, one spoon metaphor still exists today, and it's really about our responsibilities today in sharing land, food, resources, the things Jody acknowledged and that we're grateful for this good life. And I'm grateful just for this moment in time that I'm here with you. Like, I don't know that I have minutes later. I have this time, and I'm grateful for it. Also, we talked about the Two-Row Wampum Belt, which is a treaty belt from the 1500s. And this treaty really talks about the 3 white rows in the middle that represent trust, friendship, and peace, and the purple rows that separate that are parallel to one another and are equal, are really the settler and non-Indigenous people ship in one waterway, their waterways, and in the other waterway, we believe Indigenous people in their canoes. their ways of life, their language. So what we believe in this actual belt is that when these two systems today, we call them systems, not so much waterways, if they should come together, often it creates havoc. And I'll give you an analogy. If a big ship comes too close to a bunch of canoes, they're going to topple within minutes. They're not going to do well. And when you think about Indian residential school policy, the 60 scoop policy, like all of these things that happen from the larger system and what it's done to canoes, it didn't do very well. So we need to consider any policies or understanding between ships and canoes, that if it's not trust, friendship, and peace, that it could be harming, definitely to the canoe people. Often I work with agencies and organizations that say, you know, Faith, I feel like sometimes I'm in that canoe system, you know, and I'm working with the big ship. And you might feel that in here today in your work. Even if you work at a university and college, sometimes it feels like that in your departments. So that analogy, I think, applies to all of us today. But how we can do this is really wanting to understand trust, friendship, and peace in our relationships, and to respect one another. And I'm going to get a little further into this one when we talk about some of the concepts of living the good life. So when we talk about COP, community of circle of practice, community of practice is how we refer to it as well. We really look at these policies, and I carried over the rows that you just saw, purple and white, to give people to the understanding that we have policies, collaborations, partnerships, education and research, and coming together like today, that we acknowledge in each other. And we bring this practice together in communities to really think about shared understanding, interests, research. How do we do this? And Grandmother's Voice is about that, bringing people together. We talked a little bit about Indian residential schools, and we know that this has taken place in Canada, and reconciliation and how that's connected. We talked about where we're transforming from an piece of artwork that talks about on the left-hand side where we have, you know, we didn't have our understanding, our culture, our identity, where we're moving now to a more colorful way of life as the Indigenous people reclaim and understand who they are, even in urban area and urban design. When we looked at truth and reconciliation, we gave some information where you can go and get your own understanding. There's about 536 pages to the summary, so it's a very big document. We also broke that down to Truth and Reconciliation's Commission of Canada calls to action. So there are 22 topics and 94 calls, and you might see yourself reflected in this work of where you want to go. So these slides are there. You're able to find this information. We had a discussion last week, but we have a lot more to go through this week. So we're going to move on. Parts of that we did pull out was missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And this is happening in your communities today. You might have relationships with organization or yourselves doing this work already. So it's there, and there's an understanding for sure of where we're going, as well as Every Child Matters, Orange Shirt Day, September 30th. And now we know that to be Reconciliation Day, which is a national awareness day. I'm not going to say holiday, but some people refer to it as a holiday. So there's an awareness that's happening in Canada around the 94 TRCs, Truth and Reconciliation, that I think organizations and community people working with Indigenous people should be aware of. So we move to Indigenous ways of knowing and being. And some of the areas that we're going to discuss, and I'm pretty sure, did we discuss this last week as well, Minima Boswin, the framework? Okay, yeah. So we talked about, you know, what is a framework for Indigenous people? Well, when we considered this in our research as Scunna Family Learning Center and working with elders, as you are, Jody, with Grandmother's Voice, we had to look at what did we do before contact in these areas, in these lands. So 7 grandfathers teachings still resonated with us. The 4 directions circle teachings, 7 grandfathers teachings, the cradle board teachings. Now, mind you, these are the Anishinaabe in the Southwest region of Ontario. It looks different in the lands of where you're from. So you may want to pay attention to that when you are doing your work. Oh, Sorry, guys, I'm just moving through my slides and I can't see them. There it is. So you might want to consider what that is. We're also looking at cradle board teachings in our research, 7 stages of life tool, which we're going to get into, relationship web tool, and balance and wellness. So we're going to talk about these today. So Indigenous cultural practices, you know, they come from our stories, our histories, remembering, right, where we were, what we did, and before contact, and what does that mean? So a lot of this learning comes from our elders, our grandmothers, our knowledge keepers. We have something called letting go practices, because you have to realize when you deal with trauma, you have to find ways to let go, right? And if we're not letting go, new information can't come in. So this is a practice today of letting go and sharing everything that we have with this community, with you, that you would have understanding too. So part of this is about sharing. So we also talked about our ways of knowing and how they're different. You have your Western colonial thought process, ego, I am the one, you need me, versus the Indigenous unity, we are one, we need each other. And the value in them is what I'm talking about, not to devalue any of it. There's just values, and the unity in what we're hoping to achieve in the work that we do for Indigenous people is where we have this collective understanding that Jody mentioned it. The land doesn't need us. Animals don't need us. The water doesn't. We need them. So I think sometimes we have a little backwards as human beings. Still today, I observe animals and plant life in my world, and water and air in the earth, just to understand my place, right, in the world today. And it helps me as an individual. So this overall unity thinking is where Indigenous people come from. So we're not judging this, we're just letting you know there are some differences. Also, we talk about 7 grandfathers teachings, and the value in this teaching from the Haudenosaunee people and other nations as well is really considering you in the middle. So this little person here in the middle is really you. And we're talking about the impact of people who made decisions in your life before you were born, your great grandparents coming together and having their children, and so on and so on and so on, to your parents having you. There was decisions made that you were not a part of, but definitely impact your life, right? And I teach this to children in a way in community that, you know, you can take one stone, and if you move that stone, just flip it. That's all you're going to do. Under that stone is a whole way of life, of insects, earth, plants, possibly. All of this is happening, root systems. And when you flip that stone on top of that grass, you're affecting that grass and whatever is living there. And it's just a stone, you know, but you can see it. You can see the worms and the little insects going away, and because kids do it. And now you're responsible for that. You're responsible to help those find home and housing. You're responsible for the relocation, right? We have to be mindful of how the sun is now going to beat on that earth that's been covered, that was wet and damp, and now is going to be dry and hard and need to grow grass. I don't know. So when we think about, you know, our responsibilities for 7 generations to come, that's what we consider. So when we're also birthing into the community, because women born whole and complete, keepers of civilization, carriers of water, we believe that we birth everything into society, including future generations. Future generations we birth, and we have a big responsibility for that. And men have a responsibility as well as the protectors of women's hearts. I don't know if I shared that last week, but that was a very powerful teaching that I received just recently. So if we had protectors of women's hearts and women birthing everything into society, I think we would have a lot of balance, and we wouldn't have a lot of the conversations that we have today around homelessness, children and families going hungry, aging population not being supported. It's just all of that, right? So 7 generations.
Sorry,
Jody.
No, I just want to add, you know, when I do talks as well, I bring up the social determinants of health, which is the standard that our government basically is responsible for, right? The social determinants of health are social and economic factors, basically, that influence health and well-being of us living in society. And so, they have that there's like, I think they have listed, I'm going to read them. Income and income distribution, education, unemployment and job security, employment and working conditions, early childhood development, food insecurity, housing, social exclusion, social safety network, health services, Aboriginal status, gender, race, disability. This is basically, what the government looks at for everyday living for us. They have to check these standards. And when I'm hearing Faith describe all of this, this should be a part of all of that. And I just kind of, some people, when they hear that, oh yeah, that makes sense. This is how Indigenous people, through all of these teachings, made sure that the people were taken care of in this way. And I think what's missing in that is spirituality in that list that we read. There's a few things, but anyway, it's a little sidebar.
Wonderful, Jordan. And you're right. So these future generation thinking is social justice thinking. Like when I think about, some of us talk about equity, diversity and inclusion, but it really is about justice. And I really believe 7 generations thinking is about justice today. So the 4 directions and the teachings, this is a master's degree. We're not going to go through all this today, but I can tell you there's a lot of people Jody can refer you to that would sit with you in many ceremonies for many, many, many moons to learn about these 4 directions. And in here, we just list the directions, the elements, the earth, air, fire, water, the people, the understanding of the physical body, the spiritual body, the physical, mental, emotional, all of that, and the medicines. And again, I'm not getting into this today, but just to give you the broad spectrum of Indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing and how it needs to be respected for today. Because if we don't have balance, we're not going to do well. And we're not doing well today, by the way, even with those social determinants. So when we think about 7 grandfathers' teachings, this really talks about, having this as a human being in your life, in yourself, that you have truth, that you have humility, you have respect, you have wisdom, right? That you have love, you have honesty, courage. So these things, I remember learning when I was younger. I thought, oh, well, I can look that up in the dictionary. I know what that is, And when one elder said to me, a knowledge holder, they were above him at the time, and he says, you got to pray for these things. And when you have these things in your life, you have good life. So I began to pray about it. And believe me, it wasn't about the dictionary. It was about experience. It was about learning. It was about having knowledge that you're not going to find online. So pray for that. Bring that into your life, ceremony over it. And believe me, I think all human beings have some teachings of this kind in their lives. So when we talked about the cradle board a little bit, these teachings, cradle board is really about family, the basis, the foundation of what family is, who comes together. And often what I do know is that when Indian residential schools were in full effect, they were burning the cradle boards as they were collecting the children, because I think they understood the significant value that cradle boards had and meaning to Indigenous people. The science today around brain development and cradle boards is phenomenal. There's a lot of journals, I Google them myself, but you'll find them. There are journals that talk about brain development and muscles, strength training, asymmetric and isometric training in muscles. And what the science is saying is that Indigenous people, by putting their children in those moss bags, that's what this beaded area, the cloth is, what they're called moss bags, and children were wrapped in there, and it was actually womb-like experience. And Dr. Stuart Shanker out of Hamilton, Ontario, speaks to womb-like experience, and he believes that the female human being was not able to carry an infant human for the 24 months that was required to develop the brain. And in doing so, he recommends to families today, women and children, that they give babies womb-like experience for at least 12 months after birth. So 24 years womb-like experience for that brain to, 24 months for that brain to develop. For Indigenous people, we had that knowledge. And why our babies were with their birth mothers, Inuit women would have carried them in a womb-like experience in their actual outfit, their clothing, carried their babies on their backs in front of them, and babies nursed, fed, and lived with mom. And for some of the Indigenous who carried cradleboard teaching, those cradle boards were carried on the back of the women and would be with the women all of the time. And those babies would have been wrapped in that womb-like experience. And the whole time their little muscles were being exercised. We call it strength training today. So that when they were able to let themselves out of those bags, which they did, that they had the muscle and brain development required to do well. So I look for the day that in early childhood education, that in Canada, that we will be using this philosophy in working with children and family. Today, I can equate that to people wanting weighted blankets to sleep, weighted blankets for children, and weighted shoes and vests, so that children who have trauma can still be in a setting where they have success for learning. So think about that. If you're a person who might have a little bit of an anxiety, sleeping issues due to COVID-19 and what it presented, get yourself some weighted blankets and start to bundle yourself, because it really does heal trauma. And so when we think about that, this is the teaching of the cradle board. What I do know is every bead, not in this particular one, but in every bead that was handed down had a story of that child and its family and its past generations and what they looked for the future. So those stories would be given to those babies in their moss bags. The board itself was fastened out of a living tree. And the life that comes into that is connecting us again to that ceremony of trees and plants and the respect that comes with it. So there's so much in the teaching, and just the wrap around the head where you can see the wooden piece that's fashioned there was to show how much Indigenous people believed in the brain and the brain development for protection. So there's just a lot. That's a whole nother curriculum that I'm hoping to develop in my lifetime, but just the understanding of, sometimes I call it parenting 101, but we say that when a person is expecting, it's the whole family expecting. It's not just mommy, it's daddy, it's grandparents, aunties and uncles, and they all go to school together to learn how they're going to care for future generation, their new baby. So I wanted to get further into this. This is where I'm at, Jody, for this week. And we're talking about living the good life, because you're like, oh, what is all this? That was all the foundation for living the good life. So what I want to do is get a little deeper into the 7 stages of living the good life and what that means. And I think for today, that's going to hopefully give you some direction. And I'm going to ask you not to just apply this knowledge to yourself and your family, but apply it to the organizations and the relationships you have outside of your individual family as well. So I'm going to tell a little story that when we believe our spirits were in a relationship with Gitchimanadu, that's the language of the Anishinaabe people, meaning the creator, the great creator, God, some people might refer to. And this relationship was about spirit in spirit. And Gitchimanadu was saying to the spirit baby, when you come to the earth, you're going to go through the eastern door. And we're going to talk about that. And the individual humans that are there are going to teach you about kindness. They're going to teach you about generosity, truth, and belief. Some people will call that strength or power, but we believe it is belief. So these 4 sacred teachings came when you were born. That's what we believe to the earth. And we spend our life proving it. Kindness in the world, generosity, truth, and belief. We spend our life searching for it if we don't have it. So what happens is when baby is born through that eastern door, baby's spot is still soft on top. So we believe they have a communication with spirit world at that point to stay or go even. And baby says, you were right, creator. This woman, she was kind. She shared her body with me for 9 months, 40 weeks. And then baby thinks and again translates the generosity. She's now holding me to her breast and feeding me for the first time, sustenance. She's so generous. And then truth, then those few moments is born in that baby's brain. And for the first time, they have truth and belief. This is what we believe. And when this is disrupted by current policies that we have faced as Indigenous people, where children are apprehended at birth for whatever reasons, that we believe that baby child suffers trauma throughout their life. So it is significant for us to understand that bonding, and today I see it everywhere, that bonding babies with mommies is one of the most precious things that we can give to that newborn child. And now there's legislation about that. We don't separate. That bonding needs to happen right there in the delivery room. And it's skin to skin contact. People talk about mom feeds for the first time, like all of this. But even, we'll just go 50 years, some mothers were put asleep to give their babies. And they didn't see their babies till they woke up. Could have been hours. Maybe it was 60 years ago. Don't know, 70 years. So we're learning as human beings these beautiful teachings that we call living the good life. So when we come through that eastern door, there's these fires that we go through. And again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on every fire, but there is meaning here. And the stories are here, so they're there for you to reflect on, to learn about, to share in your work. But understand it's a framework, okay? This is a framework for the good life, and who doesn't want that? So we talk about, we gave this ages like birth to 7. We didn't want to do that, but the community called for that. They were like, well, Faith, when is this age? Well, the good life is really about when you come together for the first time in those first 7 years. It could be your marriage. So let's think about that. Could be a new job, that everybody's doing everything for you, taking care of you, making sure you have food and a shelter and clothing. And if we do this, then we're building the foundation for these children to have a good brain. That's what I talk about today, that they're able to critically think, make decisions that are good for themselves. That's what we're talking about. When this is disrupted, we have individuals who don't get along very well in society. It's just the way it is. And there could be behaviorals. There could be other signs that we're seeing with anger in our communities in young children. So when we're looking at the good life, we need to consider, and I'll tell you where this is relevant today because of COVID-19 and children being isolated for so long, we're not sure how that impacted the brain and growth and development in young children. I just want you to be aware of that, those of you who might work with young children. So this good life, and there is ACEs where we talk about trauma, right, in the early years and how that impacts that overall health of an individual, from suicide to heart disease. So you'll want to read up on that as well. So when we look at the fast life, 17 to 14 years old, this is really where children are asking a lot of questions. Why do I need to be in when the street lights come on? Why do I need to eat my vegetables? How come the sun comes up, right? And all of these questions that we need to answer. Where do babies come from, right? How come my uncle is this way and my grandma is that way? So, we need as adults to find truth to help these children in these years, because when they move on to that wandering life, we really get tested here. And I know because a lot of families come back to me and they're saying like, oh, my daughter, she dyes her hair every month, 4 different colors, and they're wearing clothes that I didn't even think you could wear them that way. So people are questioning that, right? And really, this is what they're supposed to be doing, is their own research, wandering and considering how they fit in this world and what does it look like. So, but I know a lot of families get upset and are alarmed during this period of time. I don't know if you're getting this emergency alert, but there is one. So the truth life is really that 21 to 28 years. And this happens after wandering life, where elders and teachers and mentors and guides and people are brought into this phase. And they're really seeking for truth. And actually, Jody, I'm going to use you and me because you brought that up earlier. But sometimes this happens in organizations that are in their fast life, just incorporating, growing, that they need mentorship, right? And we go through this quickly. My friends and colleagues sometimes laugh when I say like, oh, you remember when you started working with us? Everybody gave you a coffee, showed you where the pens were, even let you borrow their pen. And then shortly after that, they're like, get your own coffee, get your own pen. Because you've already developed through the fast life, the wandering life, and this is your truth life. And honestly, some people question at that point, is this really the place I wanted to work for? So we have to think about that. Is this really the relationship I wanted to be in? So we have to think about that. So this isn't just about the ages, right, of children and how we grow to be adults, but it also is about all of our relationships, whether we're organization to organization, people to people, in a marriage. That's what it looks like. So we have the planting life and what that looks like today. And this phase is really about looking across that fire and finding like behaviors. And we then come together, like Jody explained, our organizations coming together to do this. And we're planting seeds in Halton region. That's all this is about planting. And we're going to see how those seeds grow, but we're also going to take responsibility. So this is when you're choosing your significant other to build your family, right? That's what we're talking about, age 28 to 35. Now, Stuart Shanker says that the adult brain isn't fully developed until the age roughly 26 years old. And that's all the science today. Tom Porter, who was an elder of mine, Haudenosaunee man, talks about a grandfather who really talks about you require 4 cycles of life as human beings before you can successfully relationship outside of yourself. And every cycle, because I was like, well, how many years? What's a cycle? 7 years. So roughly 28 years. So this was taught to me long before the science of Dr. Stuart Shanker. These are grandmother's teachings. Thousands of years, Indigenous people already knew that if you were having a baby at the age of 20, you would need community support. You would need it. If you were going to college and university or learning to be a hunter and a trapper, you would need support before the age of 28. You're not going out on your own. You would need that and require that support. So if people are entering into relationships between the age of 21 and 28, chances are they're going to need family support, community support to help them along that way. So that's all that means. It doesn't mean you can't do it, but it's about planting those seeds and planning. So this doing life is really about 35 to 49, and we're talking about the practice, right? This is the life's journey. We have children now, possibly a home that's been created, and there might be some bumps in the road along the way. So in this phase, we're doing in the home, we're learning, we have the plan, right? We're working, all of this is happening. So ages 35 to 49, if you're in that age, you're in your doing life. And if you're doing life, you're doing well. You're right where you need to be. I'm thinking if you're 35 to 49 and you're somewhere still wandering, we might need to think about that ceremony around it. It's not wrong. We're just wandering. I found myself in my doing life starting over many times in that fast life and in that, good life. So think about that. When marriages fail and people decide to enter into new partnership, they might be in this age range and they got to think about, okay, what are we doing? Right. because sometimes it's blended families, that part of it too. So there's all of this that's happening in that doing life, and we still require support. I have to let you know. And then we move into that teaching elder power life. And if you're the ages of 49 plus, this is where we talk about being able to give back. In the doing life, you're giving to community, your own little family. I'm sorry, your own little family. You can do a little bit of community work in there, but it's not a lot. But when you get to that elder power life, you're really teaching now. You're in the community. Your responsibilities are really about the community, and wanting to share that. So some of your agencies might be celebrating their 50 years in the community. Well, you're the teaching power life. We should be looking to you for that support. So think about that. And again, this is not this framework applies to all of us. And it's to give us insight to who we are. And that these 7 stages are definitely fluid, just as I explained to you before throughout the presentation, and that you can use this in many ways. So this Indigenous knowledge is very, very powerful, I believe, and that we need to recognize it today and really try to bring it into our work if we're talking about reconciliation. Jody, anything to add to that before I move on? Are you good?
Oh yeah, I'm so good. I
Okay.
hope everyone else is good. I'm loving that. I think just knowing this intelligence existed, gives people another, just another way of thinking about why Indigenous people are, in this time of liberation, I guess you could say, in a sense where, we weren't just people living off the land, and, there were systems, there were cycles that
Yes,
followed
deep
the
cycles of
moons,
systems.
right. And it just helps to break down those stereotypes. And funny enough, I have my Tom Porter book out. I was,
Yep.
yeah. So one of my elders too, that I got to spend some time with him anyway. That's a great book. And my grandma.
Jody, put that in the chat as a resource so they can pick that up on their own. And
Yeah,
keep going. Sorry, Jody.
No. I was just acknowledging that his book is called "And My Grandma Said."
And my grandma said,
because the men acknowledge the women, and that it's this, I think I may have mentioned it last time. It's like this, they're coming above ground. This knowledge of the grandmas is here. And so it's time for them.
And
right?
we're keepers of civilization, born whole and complete with 400 eggs. It's our responsibility.
Yeah.
And I think that's the beauty in all of this, is that when we begin to understand the ways of knowing and being of the original people, there's deep, deep thought. I mean, some of my knowledge keepers tell me that the knowledge has been here through human beings for almost 60,000 years. And in Turtle Island, which we talk about North America, Canada, and US, and parts of Mexico, we're looking at 10,000 to 2,000 years. That's what's been handed down. So this is a lot of knowledge over thousands of years. And honestly, it's here. We just don't name it what it is. Like I talk to people about frameworks all the time, because you might be thinking, well, how do I use this in my everyday life? It's about a framework. It's about a way of life that creates balance. And that's what I'm going to show you next, is this relationship web. And you've seen webs. I'm sure a lot of you do research. You've seen webs, you might understand. And I remember the day that we were considering how we would bring together community to understand, and we're talking fragmented, broken community that's non-trusting of agencies, individuals. And why? Because our children were taken, because we were put in jail for practicing our beliefs and sharing this knowledge today. Believe me, if we would have spoke this way, we could have been in jail. So you got to understand that there was a lot of fear in the people, and trust was a big issue. So we had to begin with kindness, generosity, truth, and belief. That's where we began with the framework and building this in community. And then to the knowledge of how do we build relationships? And what I say is that Indigenous people are experts in relationship, because we know we don't relationship with just human beings, but we relationship with everything seen and unseen. And that relationship is powerful when it's acknowledged. So the relationship web is mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. It's about coming together. The only reason why we come together today is about kindness, generosity, truth, and belief. If that isn't in the room, I'm not there. I'm not there. It's not necessary. So when we think about how do you build relationships, this is what we have. This is what we strive to be. And I'm not saying that I don't go into situations where people are hurt, damaged, and crying. I go there all the time. But I go with kindness. I go with something to offer. I go with truth and truth seeking. And I believe that we're going to do well. So I think that there's an idea to this framework of who we are. So in developing this particular web, you can see the arrows go back and forth on each part of this. And these circles on the outside could be 5, 3, 1 to 100. It just symbolizes how we move in relationships. But what doesn't change is the reason. What is the reason to come together today? And I always ask that, what is our reason for coming together? And that's called tobacco, because when we come together, there's an exchange of relationship. And people say we give tobacco and it's a contract. Anishinaabe people call it sima. That's the word in their language. And what I'm learning about that, it wasn't just the plant tobacco. It was what it symbolized, the carrying of prayer to Creator, that smoke, that spirit that we see, the tobacco as the medicine, the first medicine. And there's a teaching in that as well. And all of that coming together is why we're here. So people need to come with their mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. That I believe. And often they're only coming mentally or emotional, maybe physical. They're just in the room, but not really. And you can feel that. So we offer through kindness, generosity, and truth, water, like this medicine, Bish. We're like, would you like some water? I'm seeing that maybe the baby's hungry, or, maybe a cup of tea. Like, let's start that relationship there and build that trust. And people will say, maybe we don't have time for that today, or with COVID, we do everything online. Ask them to get their own cup of tea. Ask them to get their water, because it's so sacred to the work that we do. So there's many ways. And you know what? Sometimes people do need to bring their own to the circle, right? They do. They need that because that's value too. So this relationship really talks about the reason we come together. And today, as an organization, any organization we get involved with, we go through this same PowerPoint teachings that you see, because we want people to know this is the way we relationship. So there's no guesswork in our relationship. So when we're not there, because kindness, generosity, and truth and belief isn't there, they're not going to question or say, oh, something's missing. That's why they didn't come. So understanding when a family comes to us, or an individual, we put them in the middle, whatever they're coming for. And then we look together for the support and the resources on the outside. So often I'll just use a parent needs speech and language for their child, and we put the child in the middle. We're like, well, who's involved? And they do mention maybe some agencies, but other times they're mentioning, the father, the grandmother, the grandfather, his big sister, and we're talking about those relationships. And often when it's a parent or a mom, they never see themselves as their child's resource. And that was intriguing to me, because I would be like, Mom, what about you? Oh, yeah, I'm there. But they're so connected to their child at this point. I don't see they see themselves different, right? And I think that was a good teaching for me to understand that the reason to come together at this point is they're still connected. Remember in the beginning? And sometimes agencies can still be connected that way when they don't realize, or networks or individuals. So the reason to come together is so important, to identify who your resource is, who your support is. So when we do this work, that it's holistic in its design, and that we're doing the best that we can do for living the good life, because that's what we want. We want to live the good life. When I think about the good life, I can't leave out another tool that we brought into the system in our work, was what we call balance and wellness circle. And really, this is about keeping balance in the individual, in the groups, whatever that is. And like I said to you early on, get your lunch, get your water, because you're going to need that. We're here for an hour. So when we look at movement, we often know that movement is important. And people, that physical part of the body, yes, physically, but also regular exercise, running, stretching, dancing, that we need to do that. So we need to create that in our everyday work for people. So how can we move and how do we move? And it's important. So that's part of the balance. Also nutrition, we talk about our emotional, our sustenance, eating good food, having access to that is important, drinking water, our well-being, our healthy, our traditional medicines, all of that is a part of this nutrition. And you may have practices on your own that you bring into your life. So it's important, in order to keep kindness, generosity, truth, and belief, this inner circle in the individual is crucial. It's difficult to keep kindness, generosity, truth, and belief when your care level for yourself is missing something. And I always say to my colleagues and friends, sometimes I get hangry because I'm hungry. I forgot to eat and I'm angry. And it has nothing to do with the room. It has nothing to do with what's happening around me. It's just that I'm hungry and I don't even realize it until I'm already in a state of anger and I don't know why. So that's how important nutrition is to our everyday. So always have some nutritional food with you, because you never know when you're called to something and you miss something that you don't want to take that home, right? And I don't know if any of you know of the leader, Kind Leadership, Darcy Lang. She is an Indigenous, but she does a little teaching on leadership with kindness. And I love her work. And she's connecting in the way of Indigenous. And she talks about a doorknob in her practice, is that she doesn't open that doorknob until she checks herself. Is before she enters kindness, generosity, truth, and belief, is she there mentally, physically, and emotionally and spiritually for her family, for the people she works with? So when you think about turning that doorknob and entering into those circles, you really want to make sure you have this holistic thinking, with you. So we also talk about rest. And what does that mean? Well, that spiritual part of rest is what we call it. Yes, sleep is a part of it, but also the peaceful state, having purpose, relaxation, recuperation. And that could be due to COVID, right? So some of these individuals I speak with today, they're exhausted and they're going to work every day. And it's not that they're not getting a good night's sleep. It's that they're not seeing an end to what we've been under for so long. So what does that mean to living in a peaceful state? What does that mean about having purpose? Why I shared my Indigenous name and why you have a name is it gave me purpose in my life. So when I would question, oh, why am I doing this? I'd have to go back to those original instructions in my life and say, oh, I'm still on my path. It's still my journey. So remember to practice relaxation, no matter where you are. Like, look away from this computer right now, and give your brain a break. Just 20 seconds, look outside, see the snow if you have that, but give your brain a break. And it's okay. You don't have to ask permission for that rest in your life today, but find it and have a practice of it, because your spirituality needs to show up for you as well. When we looked at mindfulness, our mental meditation, awareness, being in the moment, non-judgmental, being kind, this is that mindfulness, that mental state. Some people think mindfulness is having knowledge. Well, I know. I mean, it is good to have knowledge, but it is also understanding that there's this mental state of mind that we need to have in a good way, and being aware. So a lot of that is, you have knowledge, but let's meditate on that. Let's understand, let's take the time, let's breathe through it, because it's important. So all of this together is what we call the balance. And often it's funny, after I do some of these coming together teachings with people, I'll go to their offices or I'll visit with them or see on their screen behind them, they have this up to remind them that they need this balance in their life every day. So this isn't about the people we work for and with. This is really about you. And remember, well individuals create well families create well communities, and well communities build well nations. So if it starts with the individual and that's what we have to be concerned with, we're going to be okay. So think about that. Think about how powerful that is, Indigenous knowledge. We also talk about something we call the letting go practice. And I think this is important because I'm going to bring us together to talk pretty soon, and to talk about some of the things that we've learned. But I'm thinking about letting go today and what that means. And letting go is a big deal. There's many ways that we do it. Myself, I've learned the letting go practice from Rebecca Martel years ago. I was in Toronto. Oh, geez, I was probably like 19 years and years ago. And we needed to find a real stone. And you try to do that in downtown Toronto, that was difficult. And then we were charged to go to water. We were invited to go to water and to release everything that troubled us from the time we could remember in birth. And I never gave a lot of that thought, by the way. I didn't want to think about it. I buried it. It's traumatic, a lot of it. And I thought, and I was working with youth at this time in the city of Windsor. And I was their youth leader. And I was like, I don't know if I can do that. So we were in a workshop in downtown Toronto, about 100 of us. So together we partnered up, and I found my way to the water, and, finally found not a piece of concrete, but a real stone. And I spoke to that grandfather and told them everything. And what she taught us was, when you do that, you won't remember, not the way you remember now with all the pain and all the hurt, this exercise. And I didn't believe it. I was like, that's too easy. So I did it. And it didn't happen right away. But the teaching was, when you lay that stone, not throw it, not skip it in the water, but when you lay that into open water, that water cleans that grandfather. And as that grandfather cleans, it cleans you. So think about those waves that just come over you right now and how that would clean you. So all those things that I didn't want to carry in my bundle anymore, even though they gave me purpose for the work that I do today, I laid that in the water with that grandfather. And I do recall some of it, not a lot, only when I need to in my work, but it doesn't guide me. It doesn't interrupt or disrupt my thinking today the way it did prior to that. So that letting go practice is very, very powerful. And I invite you to find your grandfather's stone, to offer tobacco when you pick it, because that's the way we do it, or at least say a prayer of gratitude for the grandfather. Tell that grandfather everything that bothers you from the time you were born, and that you can remember, and even the things I said I can't remember, and lay that into that water. And I can tell you, over time, it does wash away. And it doesn't have the same meaning that it had prior to that. So I was able to get on board, right, with the balance of life, with understanding, my purpose in life and who I was, to accept, the individual and why I was put on this earth. So there's a lot of understanding to letting go. And when I heard during COVID, there was a lot of, including my own family, people who passed away that we couldn't be together for whatever reasons. And there needed to be a lot of letting go. And so I encouraged agencies and organizations that I worked with in the region where I worked to let some of this go. And some of them came back with praise report, good report, to let me know that it worked. And I was grateful for that. So you can also let go by holding a glass of water. I have mine here, Bish, and you can talk to that water. I'm not going to let go this water, I'm drinking it, but for that purpose. And you give thanks again for the water, and you just take it outside and you let that go back on the earth. It's just that simple. So some of this teaching is powerful when we consider who we are as a people and the work that we do with individuals, because letting go brings meaning to the work that we do. Number one, in a sense that we create more space within us and individuals to do the good work and to live the good life. So when we're carrying a lot of trauma year after year, disappointment, which we all have in life, you know, all of it, financial woes, work woes, whatever those are, that we got to let that go. Because what I know today, and I explained earlier, John Agoni and his teaching in the early 2000s was that we need joy and celebration today, and that we need to have that language. And when we're not practicing letting go all of the time, we're carrying that with us. It's just in the background, and sometimes it comes up when we're tired or when we're not so imbalanced. So when I think about letting go practice, in the beginning, it was like, honestly, I was there once a week. It's like, I gotta let go of a whole lot of stuff. But then in my lifetime now, I'm 58 and I'm no longer 19, you know, maybe 4 times a year that I practice the ceremony of letting go for myself. I do it a lot more with others. Moon ceremony, which Jody talked about, when the grandmothers come together, there's a part of that ceremony about letting go. And we speak to the fire and we howl at the moon, and we let go of what maybe is in our lives even that month. So this practice is good. It's good for us to have a practice, even as agencies, to keep our agencies well, our networks well, is to have that time of letting go. So those are just some, I'm just gonna pause for a second here, if we can, because I think I gave you a lot of information. I think people might want to have a little conversation about. So
It's
I'm
like
going
a
to bring
retreat. It was
Yeah,
like
I'm
an
gonna bring
hour
you-
and a bit retreat that we just had with you.
I'm going to stop sharing because I
Mhm.
just feel like I need to, Jody.
Yeah, of course.
And people turn on your cameras or not. It's up to you.
Mhm.
But I think we need to have a little discussion about what we're talking about, because really, I talk about a framework for working with individuals and families and community, but it really is about you.
Mhm.
And I acknowledge that I have not met some of you face to face, but some of you I may have. But I encourage you and I acknowledge that there's been some really hard things that we've been through over the last little while. And it's important to know that we're in the same place, you know, and I trust in Indigenous ways of knowing and being, first, because I am Indigenous, but secondly, because I know it's about being together. It's about a relationship. And I want to bring that goodness to the people. And that's my responsibility, right? That's your responsibility. So can we have a little bit of conversation? It's not a big group today. I'm seeing only 19. Is that true? There's another, okay. Yeah, so, and I'm sorry, but I may have pinned somebody like Kara and Kylie. Is that on purpose? Did I do that by accident?
I don't see them pinned now, so they might have unpinned
I did it
themselves.
then. So I'm going to unpin you so I don't cause you to speak when you don't want to. So if you can think about that, is there any thoughts around what you've learned so far? Jody, any comments?
Well, not really. I'd rather give the space to the guests. I've had my own letting go experience, but it wasn't quite as beautiful as yours. Mine flew out the window, but it is however it comes, you know, like it really did fly out the window for me, where I was stuck in the fast life and I was worried and I was going, and I had just left a retreat and I just left all my notes in the back, and I was thinking about, how am I going to make change in my life? How am I going to really let go of all of these things that can control me, that really hold me in the same place every day? And I was driving, rushing, I think maybe to a flight or something, and all of these notes that were in the back seat flew out the window on the 403. And I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? But one of our teachings is that when we're present in the moment, whether you're writing or you're just present, and you made that time to be present, your spirit absorbs that knowledge And so I learned how to let go in similar ways now. So it's important for us so thank you for that teaching and that sharing.
Something that I'm going to encourage you to do, because the next slide just really talks about that grounding and rooting that we're talking about. Someone wrote in the chat too, we're going to catch that, Jody. But I want you to think about Minima Bazu and living the good life and the teachings that you received. And what does living the good life mean to you, and how do you feel? And you can put that in the chat box as well. So letting go is a part of that good life. These are just exercises on how we maintain living the good life. So what does living the good life mean to you, and how do you feel? So I think, if you don't want to discuss openly, use the chat. But I think it's important, because that's our grounding and reflection work, right, of who we are. So I did see a chat something go in the box. I'm not sure, Jody, if you can read that or not.
Mm-hmm.
I can read that if it's easier for
Yeah.
everybody. So we have a couple of comments, and Faith, thank you so much for those wonderful teachings. We have Kara, who's mentioned that there's lots of information to digest, and all very valuable, no matter who each of us is or where we have come from. And they go on to mention that they'll be thinking about how to apply the learnings over the coming week, right? The ability to internalize, I think, is so important. And then Tina mentioned that the pandemic has been a gift in some ways. It has
Yes.
taught her, or Tina, the joy of not being busy all the time, of letting go. So very interesting, reflections and feedback. And if I can just add, Faith, to what you were sharing, I found it so interesting. The water activity of letting go, like to think or speak to the water, and then go out to nature, and then pour that water out to Mother Earth. I found it interesting because part of letting go is the ability to know that you don't have to if you don't want to. So you can drink that water if you really want to, but you making a volitional choice of letting go of that water into Mother Earth, so it can sustain something other than what you knew it to sustain for yourself, right? And I thought that's so powerful, that and even just thinking and speaking to it, like we tend not to do that in our Western ways of living per se, but the connection that you get from just doing just that is I think so profound and so powerful, and is a way to connect you to something far greater than yourself. And oftentimes when people are going through certain things in their life, it's hard to see that perspective, and something as simple as we all have access to water, and to use that for our own healing and letting go. I thought it was so profound that you shared that, and I think that's something that I'll definitely take back with me.
And Nabel, what I found comforting in the work that we do today is that connecting with people in a balanced way. I think that's, and when we do that authentically, it's a ripple effect. Like, people get well. Like, we don't have to have the answers. We don't know like what people need, but we do have a pathway. We do have something that we can share. And that's just letting go, or that's, like I said, offering the water, or the teaching of living the good life. And it's funny because when I teach that, just what we just went through, living the good life, I lose a lot of people because they're like, okay, where am I? and I'm like, any questions? And they're still thinking about where am I in my life? What do I need to do? Where's my daughter? Where's my son? So we start to think about those things, right? And maybe this is human way. This is not Indigenous. This is human way.
Mm-hmm.
This is how we all live. So I'm not storytelling. and if we can figure that out, we're going to be better.
Mm-hmm.
So we let go, we live, we have joy. That's it. And you're allowed to make mistakes. It's okay. That's life. That's the beauty. We just get back on, right? We just clean it up and get back moving. So that's what I love about life, is that acceptance.
Mm-hmm. Nyawa, Faith, there's just so much in here, like reflective thinking the whole way through, where, every time I spend time with you, this is it. Like, this is my people. Like, I've enjoyed so much when I'm with her. And knowing that she's guiding us in this community to create a beautiful community here. You know, all of her guidance, she's openly shared her knowledge. And I think, you know, Faith, if I could just say, what really keeps me inspired and excited about what we're doing here is that you encourage me to continue to the work that we're doing here, because it's like we have a clean slate. I say, you know, when we talk about what we're doing in the Halton region and why you're here with us, supporting us, because it's a new time. And there's so much knowledge that you have and experiences that you've created in your community from however long you've been doing it. But to know that we can bring all of this knowledge that you've just shared with us, and that's a foundation of what we're creating here in our community. And so I just want to acknowledge and share before we jump off, everyone for their time, for being here, for being so dialed in and here. I feel like the grandmas have say it, you know, at the beginning of the pandemic, they weren't sure that the energy could be transmitted through the, you know, technology, but I feel it. I'm emotional. You know, my waters are ready to flow because of the love that is shared and the knowledge that you shared, the experiences. And people are hearing, people are listening, they're absorbing this. And I'm so excited that we're in this time of change. And before we see you again next week we'll be with Grandma Renee and Grandma Gail, who actually popped in here while I was on with you guys. We're gathering with Indigenous community members, and if any of you are Indigenous, there is a community gathering on Monday the 21st. Faith will be there to share with our community, Indigenous community here in the region, you know, about what our vision is, or what your vision is of a space and place that you'd like to live and be and grow together in community. So you'll also see that in the newspaper this week. We are gathering. We really want to provide this knowledge to our community, make this space for Indigenous people to take up place and start to live in this way, in the good life, in their community, and to offer this knowledge to the people that they work with, or they show up with, or are in community with. And so thank you, Faith, for helping us, because her organization is the one that has brought us this far in receiving a grant from Heritage Canada to pursue looking at how we build a cultural center in this area, so that we have, you know, this foundation to share those who have not been connected to these teachings. And it's so important for us. And so, so if you are Indigenous, and, you know, you can message me and I can share that information, or you can just look for the newspaper, because it'll be a full page ad on this Thursday in all of the papers. And then also just to mention that December 3rd and 4th, we're having our Indigenous Artisan Fair out at the barn. So put that in your calendars. Come and meet the grandmas and the community members that have helped to really build this community in the Halton region. They'll be there. And yeah, I also have one book that I started reading, and I actually really love it. So I'll just pop that into the chat as well. It's called The Sleeping Giant Awakens. And there's this whole understanding, you know, from our elders of stories of a sleeping giant. But this really is a great book for those of you who still really want to move forward in reconciliation and understand how to digest what I want to say the mainstream world talks about when it comes to Indigenous, you know, the reconciliation and residential schools, and how do you move yourself in that realm. But for this space today, I'm honored, Faith, that you made it so sacred. And we began it in a really good way, you know, acknowledging the trees of life, and, you know, how we were meant to come here to live in a really good way. And so, aho.
Aho. Chimigwachi, everyone.
Nyawagwa.
Thank you, guys, and once again, thank you, Faith. Thank you for all the wonderful information you shared, and we hope to see you soon. Feel free to always drop on by, and yeah, we're a little bit over time, guys, but until next time, with Grandmother Renee, really looking forward to that session, and we'll see everybody next week. Have a good one.
Bamapi.
Bamapi.
Hi, everyone.